All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and also thanks to the conference organizers for putting on this very lovely conference. And it's great to see the Basque country. All right. So this paper probably should be more properly titled "The Status of Weather-Type Islands in Japanese." That's what I'll be talking about today. I think this afternoon is all mostly experimental syntax, psycholinguistics talks. This is a good warm-up because it's extremely narrow, so we can just focus here and then get broader, I guess, as the afternoon goes on. So in this talk, I present data from 2 experiments on Japanese weather-type islands. And this study was prompted by ambiguity in the literature, both with respect to empirical judgments and also different theories that have been developed and their predictive content. Given the lack of consensus in previous literature, my basic question is essentially an empirical one. Are weather islands ungrammatical or at least marginal in Japanese? So my subject pool was linguistically or theoretically naive. And by that, I mean they may be linguists but not syntacticians, Japanese speakers, and my methodologies. I didn't find any evidence to support the view that Japanese weathered islands are ungrammatical or degraded in Japanese. So in the following sections, I discuss the specific aspects of the data I tested, some different theoretical models which differ on the predictive content with respect to these data, and I present the data methodologies themselves, and then finally I conclude by discussing ramifications and limitations of present work. So I should say that in the past I've been somewhat ambivalent about this so-called experimental syntax paradigm, but here I am doing it, so maybe somewhat hypocritical, but we can also discuss this in the question-answer session if there's time. All right, so now I will go over briefly some historical and some background, I suppose, with respect to the overt versus covert movement distinction, starting government binding. I'll go rather quickly because I know everyone here probably is familiar with most of these references. So within government binding, Wang's 82 work on island conditions in Chinese has proven to be extremely influential. The basic insight of Wang 82, also reviewed in Watanabe 92, was that the subjacency condition on WH movement applied to S structure only, while ECP applied to movement at both S structure and LF. And this, by the way, is limited only to argument movement. This whole talk, I'm only focusing on argument movement. So, for example, in 1, subjacency violation, ungrammatical, and then in 2, we have a similar Chinese example, and according to Wang, completely fine. So, with respect to the ECP, Wang showed that LF representations that violate this principle are ungrammatical, yet non-ECP violating but subjacency violating movements are fine. So this is why he would say there is covert movement, but the subjacency condition only applies at S structure. So under the assumption, which I'll question below, that the relevant difference between English and Chinese is only the covert and overt movement distinction, we should expect the analysis of Chinese to straightforwardly predict that Japanese, which is also a covert movement language, should pattern with Chinese. So Lasning and Saito, in their 84 paper, supported Wang's analysis with respect to subjacency, citing Japanese data such as 3. So in 3, there's a sentence final Q morpheme, no, which is in C or comp in the older framework, and it must be associated with a matrix WH phrase for a grammatical derivation. In the system under discussion, Nani moves to the matrix clause at LF, yielding matrix clause direct WH question. And the example violates subjacency, but only at LF, and is fine, as we would expect, if Wang is correct. So subsequent work on Japanese, however, challenged the claim that cases normally associated with subjacency were grammatical, despite the lack of overt movement. And again, I'm only focusing on argument movement. The specific Japanese cases usually discussed in the literature, and which are the focus of this paper, involve the Japanese complementizer kadoka, whether. So researchers such as Nishigauchi and Watanabe claim that, for example, 4 should be considered ungrammatical, or at least sufficiently marginal to warrant additional theory construction. So in 4, we have topic, Janwa, and then the embedded question, Meriga Nanio Kata Kadoka, and that's the whole embedded thing, and then the matrix verb, followed by the Q morpheme. And in this example, Nani, if it takes matrix scope, the question here is the sentence, it's just an empirical question, is the sentence ungrammatical, marginal, or perfectly fine? So Lasnik and Saito also discuss for and claim that the sentence, while not perfect, is not on a par with English suggestion cases, and basically suggests that this example does not warrant further theory construction with respect to the analysis, which states that subjacency is a condition on S structure. However, Watanabe additionally claims that the judgment of 4 varies among different speakers, but offers no independent diagnostic, and states that the grammaticality status of 4 should be challenged to 2 question marks for those speakers who find it unacceptable. And it's not in the handout, but I was just looking at Norvin Richards' 2000 paper, which appeared in Journal of East Asian Linguistics, and he actually uses a star for this exact same sentence. So there's quite a bit of variation in the literature here. So there's lots of different theories that have been proposed, especially with respect to Japanese, that have been brought to bear on a couple of very complex Japanese cases, some of which have received unambiguous judgments in the literature. The empirical status of weather islands remains, in my mind, unclear. So the GB literature on W islands, or weather-type islands such as 4, I summarize it at least by saying that some consider the example bad enough to warrant theory construction, and others feel like the sentence is sufficiently good to maintain Wang's analysis. So now I'm at 2.2. And I'll discuss very briefly some theoretical approaches to subjacency. So, yeah, in the more recent literature, of course, people have basically dispensed with things like S structure, D structure, and so forth, and have adopted a derivational approach. So I'm not going to be able to talk about all theories of covert movement, but just a few sort of general approaches. Or approaches to islandhood, I should say. So let me start with 2.1, PF approaches to islandhood. This is ridiculously oversimplified, but that's okay, I think, because Professor Lasnik and others have discussed these kind of theories in detail. So essentially, in my mind at least, there's been quite a bit of convergence with Wang's GB approach, and in papers such as Merchant 2001, Box and Lasnik 2006, and most recently in Boscovich 2011, who also looks at the antecedents like Professor Lasnik did, and Ross 69 and Chomsky 72. So all of the authors above mentioned refer to now, quite familiar after this conference, very familiar, ellipsis data, in which an apparent subjacency violation is repaired or rescued, I kind of like Boscovich's term there, by ellipsis. So these are in 5, but we saw these yesterday, I think. So under the models of ellipsis developed by the authors mentioned above, like Boscovich, for example, a movement that violates subjacency has occurred in the avert, that is prior to spell out part of the derivation. Nevertheless, deletion of some relevant aspect of the structure prior to spell out, but after the movement, results in a fully grammatical sentence. So theories of islandhood which take this approach clearly predict that covert movement should not violate subjacency. Actually, I want to back off from that claim a little bit. I should say that theories, as far as I understand them, and I'm aware of them, predict that covert movement should not violate, should be fine if they violate island constraints. A final piece of data that we may consider, and it's also mentioned in the following section, is 6, in which the embedded what may take matrix scope, as noticed by Baker in 1970. So here in 6 we have who asked who bought what, and one possible answer, for me at least, is John asked who bought a car. So I think there's maybe been some debate in the literature about the wide scope interpretation of what, but I get it at least. And if we compare it to 7, you can't have what moved to the matrix position, but we can get the wide scope reading of what for 6. And if we take the PF approach to subjacency, then the grammaticality of 6 is straightforwardly accounted for. So in the next section, 2.2, I'll talk about Richards 2001. So this is his book, Movement in Language. So he develops a theory of subjacency, which clearly differs from PF approaches with respect to covert movement. Richard takes the approach that all movements are subject to subjacency, and it's a constraint on all movement. However, according to his system, there exists a class of languages which do not show subjacency effects for independently motivated reasons. So following crucial aspects of Rudin's 1988 in an LLT paper, Richards points out that languages which do all movement overtly differ with respect to subjacency effects. For example, Serbo-Croatian 8 has subjacency effects, while Bulgarian does not. And these data appeared originally in Rudin. So the crucial difference between the two languages, according to both Rudin and Norman Richards, is whether WH movement proceeds through specifiers with CP or IP. Languages which move through IP, like Serbo-Croatian, have subjacency effects, while those which move through CP do not. Richards provides multiple independent diagnostics to motivate this difference, including differences with respect to local A-scrambling, local superior word effects, local weak crossover effects, and the ordering of WH words when relevant. So I'll just take one of these diagnostics for the sake of time. In the IP absorption languages, like Serbo-Croatian, you can fix weak crossover violations by local scrambling, but Bulgarian does not have this option. And these data are in 10 and 11. So according to Richard's analysis on the next page now, the overt-covert distinction is really not the right way to divide languages of the world with respect to subjacency effects. Rather, it's the CP-IP absorption difference that we should pay attention to. The languages without subjacency effects don't exhibit them for structural reasons that have nothing to do with the overt-covert distinction. So let's turn back now to Japanese and Chinese. So if these languages differ, if they differ with respect to subjacency effects, they should also differ with respect to weak crossover and the other diagnostics. And they do differ in exactly the way we would expect if Richards was correct. So in Japanese, 12 can repair weak crossover, while Chinese cannot. And when they're applicable, these languages also differ with respect to the diagnostics. And finally, Richards must account for cases like 6, which repeated here is 14. So to account for 14, Richard proposes the principle of minimal compliance, which is a kind of a fun, I think, economy condition on global condition on syntactic objects, I suppose. So he proposes this constraint in the face of several different kinds of connectivity effects in the sense of K1983. One effect, there's multiple, is the additional WH effect, which has been recently questioned by Fedorenko and Gibson and others. But for now, let's just look at the Keynes example. So according to Keynes, and I think this was also mentioned by Bollinger maybe before him, he claims that the addition of a well-formed WH question can rescue an otherwise unacceptable sentence. So if you have something like a 15, what do you wonder who gave to John? According to Keynes, at least, is significantly improved by what do you wonder who gave to whom. Now, this data point speaks really to the whole difficulty with some syntactic judgments and experimental syntax, these kinds of things. But for me, at least, I definitely get this contrast. Maybe it's because Keynes is such a persuasive writer. I'm not sure. But according to Richards, in his minimalist account of these kinds of data, he says that one well-formed movement to a given functional projection frees that projection from respecting subjacency for subsequent movement operations. And he actually calls this a subjacency tax approach. And you can see his book for precise definitions. Under this theory, the grammatical movement of the matrix who in 14 frees the embedded what from subjacency effects as it moves to the higher clause. So as long as there's a matrix movement that's fine, then to the complementizer position, that complementizer can now attract other WH words without violating subjacency. So to summarize, theories which rely on PF-based accounts of subjacency, that is to say the overt-covert distinction, and Richards, which is the CP-IP distinction, differ in the predictive content. And this is I shouldn't say borne out, but you see the difference in the judgments they give the kind of data in question. All right, and then there's another class of theories which I won't really discuss here, but I think I should just mention it, which is the processing accounts of islandhood. So there's, I guess, not too much to say about this right now, also given time, just that the processing accounts, as far as I know, should not, with respect to at least additional WH effect, the processing accounts do not predict that this should exist, as far as I know, but we can also talk about this later. That is because WH words already cause a processing load even when they're fully grammatical. So the addition of another WH word should not, rescue or save an already ungrammatical derivation if you would take a processing approach, as far as I know. All right. So I have interim summary here in 2.4. Whether islands in Japanese have been alternately claimed to be degraded enough to warrant theoretical explanation on one hand, and to be sufficiently well-formed to be subsumed under existing accounts of subjacency, which make an overt-covert language distinction. In either case, well-developed and independently motivated theories have been constructed which differ in terms of their predictions for Japanese weather islands. Okay, so now I move to the experiment in section 3. So in order to address the empirical confusion surrounding Japanese weather islands, I developed 2 experiments. One which addresses online processing, and the other which accesses offline acceptability judgments. That's just a experimental syntax types paradigm. So on to the online experiment. So self-paced reading is a well-established paradigm in psycholinguistics, as we all know. And importantly, though, it has been used in the theory construction in the domain of island effects. And I think that, I'm sure there are multiple papers, but Colin Phillips, 2006, is a very good example of this. So in his case, which I might return to, he had subject island violations, and he was able to, so sentences which seemed bad, his subjects did have a difference in reading time. So it should work, at least for some WH islands. So subjects in a self-paced reading task are presented with sentences on a screen, one word at a time, and then using some sort of time-sensitive device like a response box, they advance the sentence word for word. Okay. And if subjects encounter processing difficulty, either due to language-specific or language general constraints, they should have relatively slower response times. So in this experiment, I constructed 10 sets of 4 sentences of the following type. In order to be able to test both the WH islands effects and if there were present additional WH effects, each sentence had an embedded object and a matrix element that could be questioned. Therefore, sentences 16a and b have no embedded WH question, but they vary with respect to whether or not there's a matrix question. The former begins with a temporal adjunct ima, now, while the latter begins with itsu, when. These 2 cases are intended as controls for the island conditions, which you can see in 16c and d. So these are just like the examples mentioned by Watanabe, and they have the embedded WH word nani, which must be interpreted as a matrix question to associate with the question particle there. All right, so I took these as a template and then constructed 9 additional sets, which were structurally identical but varied with respect to lexical items. They all contained kadoka and nani, but they differed with respect to the matrix verb and the names, all that kind of thing. There were therefore 40 test sentences altogether. So in this experiment, the 40 test stimuli were divided in a quasi-Latin square design, and by that I mean each subject saw 2 of the stimuli from each set. So each subject saw 20 of the test stimuli and 20 fillers as well. And these were presented in random order controlled by the Superlab software. And a question followed each sentence to ensure that the subjects were paying attention, as is normally the case. The question methodology was adapted from Aoshima et al., another paper that Colin Phillips was involved in, and involved identifying the grammatical subject of the sentence in the question. And subjects whose comprehension and accuracy was below 70% were discarded from the analysis, the initial analysis at least. The question methodology from Aoshima was, I think, maybe too difficult for sentences that were already very confusing and complex. So I ended up discarding quite a few subjects. If I could do it over again, I would definitely do that part over again, but that's the way it is, I guess. So I recruited 33 theoretically naive native Japanese speakers at Tohoku University in Sendai. Results from the reaction time task were log transformed to account for normalcy in the statistical analysis, and then analyzed using repeated measures ANOVA. Results from the analysis, which excluding questions which had wrongly answered comprehension questions, appear in 17. Now, when I made this table, I was, I don't know what I was thinking. You should never use color contrasts in a black and white handout. So, but fortunately, there's no statistical differences between any of the conditions, so it doesn't really matter. But in case you're curious, if you look at sub-event 8, so these are each of the sub-events is word for word. Each word plus its functional material is a sub-event, and then 8 is the question morpheme no. And if you look at the sub-event 8, the lines as they go down, it's line B, line A, line D, and line C in that order for the final sub-event. All right, so still looking at 17 here. Region 6 is Kadoka, weather, and region 7 is the immediately following matrix verb, and region 8 is the matrix question particle. The critical regions are 7 and 8, I think. And no significant differences were found between the 4 conditions. Then in 18, because of this sort of faulty question methodology, I then did all the data without excluding anything and found the same result. And here are the different lines are in order A, B, D, and C. All right. And there were, again, no significant differences were found in the critical regions. Okay, so in the next experiment, now I'm on to the offline task. I examined the same stimuli with different speakers in an untimed task. In this experiment, the stimuli were presented in the Latin square design, meaning that each subject only saw one sentence from each of the sets, that is to say 10 test sentences. Plus, in addition to the 10 sentences in the test stimuli conditions, there was one unambiguously bad sentence, like word salad type, terrible type sentence, just for control, I guess. There were also 22 fillers, so essentially 11 test sentences, 22 fillers for each person. And the first two fillers, one was ungrammatical, the other grammatical. They were presented first, and then followed by the random presentation of the stimuli and filters controlled by Qualtrics survey software. And results from the 19 subjects are included in this analysis. From 19 subjects are included here. So the graph at 19 shows the mean results with error bars, and type 1, 2, 3, and 4 correspond to types the 16A, 16B, 16C, and 16D. But again, here there's no significant difference between the different conditions, except condition 5, which was the unambiguously ungrammatical sentence. Now this is a little tricky. It shows that the survey had enough power to detect an unambiguously ungrammatical sentence. The problem here is that the sentences in question are not unambiguously ungrammatical and marginal, according to many of the people who worked on this topic. So while there is sufficient power to detect a fully ungrammatical sentence, this is not clear with respect to if there's a sufficient power to detect differences, the kind of differences that have been suggested in the formal literature. Okay, so these studies were designed to detect, now I'm on the discussion, processing difficulty or unacceptability in Japanese weather type islands, and I found no differences between the island sentences and the controls. Now, these results offer no support for models which predict ungrammaticality in the island violating cases. They don't really tell us much about the additional WH effects because no island effect was found. Now, to the extent that statistically null results can support a given analysis, these suggest, I think, a PF approach to islands based on the covert-overt distinction. I guess suggesting that might be on the right track. Now, one of my advisors, Sam Epstein, said to say very clearly for people who are quantitatively challenged in the audience, which he admittedly is, that the results here are statistically null, meaning that the null hypothesis is not rejected. It's not that the experiment exploded while I was doing it, but that there were no differences between the conditions, and it's unclear. I think a statistician would tell you that null results can't really be used to support any given theory, and it's that's one of these questions in mathematics. But in any case, it does not support a Richards type. It does not support a Richards 2001 type theory. And this experiment, I designed it very much in order to find those kinds of ungrammaticalities or marginal cases, if they indeed exist. I'll just say, since I have a few minutes left, I think that a major concern I have with studies like this is already mentioned in Chomsky 64, where he discusses the fact that certain interpretations of certain sentences may be too complex for naive speakers to interpret. And if I remember correctly, the example here is with the sentence "I had a book stolen," which in aspects he says has 3 different interpretations, but a linguist might have to actually teach a naive speaker what the 3 interpretations are. It's not clear if you're not a linguist. And for this reason, it's difficult to say why judgments of these sentences vary between naive speakers I tested, and then on one hand, and a subset of Japanese syntacticians on the other. And it's also a little troubling to me because the original data, not the stimuli I had, but the data from Watanabe's paper, I asked 2 Japanese syntacticians about the same case, and one said, "I think this is not so bad," and the other said, "Oh, I think you'll definitely find a difference here if you do this with naive speakers." So even between those 2, it was there's a difference. All right. So given the issues discussed here, and specifically the differences between Chinese and Japanese, I think that a similar type of experiment would be very fruitful in languages with a multiple WH movement, such as Serbo-Croatian and Bulgarian. So that's, I guess, future work. But I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Since I speak Japanese, I have a question on the Japanese example.
Sure.
16B and 16D.
Yeah.
This itsu, when it's supposed to be the matrix event.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
But this verb, 知りたがっている is in progressive, so I don't think it goes well with when.
I see. Okay.
So if you say 知りたがっている, that means now he is wanting.
Okay. Yeah, I had a number of different, combining with matrix verbs, a number of different question types associated with a matrix verb, like also locative type questions. I guess I have no direct response to that, but since you're a native speaker, I have to defer to you, of course.
So you might get a clear result if it's like since when that he wants to know, or something.
Yeah, sure.
It clearly modifies the matrix even.
Right. Yeah, no, I worked with native speakers to develop the stimuli, and of course I'm not a native speaker of Japanese, but so I take that into consideration. Nevertheless, yes, if you comparing 16A and 16C had no result, which don't have this issue. But if I work on this in the future, I'd definitely consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you say something more about the fillers that you used?
Yeah, the fillers. So the fillers I took from a couple different sources, I suppose. So in the Aoshima paper I mentioned, they actually they include some of their fillers. So I took some fillers from them, which were meant to be grammatical, and then I took other examples from the syntax literature. Some that were supposed to be ungrammatical and some fully grammatical, and then another subset of the fillers I just designed with a native speaker, and which were just intended to be grammatical sentences. They were different lengths, different clause, different numbers of clauses. So different. The complexity varied on a couple different, in a couple different ways, I guess. But they ranged from the word salad to the I like apples kind of.
So
sentence.
it was about half grammatical, half ungrammatical.
Yeah.
Or so expected sevens, expected ones.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it was actually a three-way distinction where like a third was bad, and then it's always a little hard to know, since as we can see here, there's difficulty in knowing if you see something in the paper how bad it really is. There was like basically 7 bad, 7 that were kind of questionable or at least very complex, even if fully grammatical, and then 7 which were just very fine.
Okay, so one thing that might help you with your results is, Likert scales are difficult because each person might be using them in a different way.
Yes.
And one thing I did in my study is I normalized the answers to the test items based on the subject's responses to the grammatical fillers.
Okay.
So the ones that I expected to be a 7, maybe they didn't mark them all as 7s, but
Right.
you can, if you normalize them, you might get some clearer results.
Yeah, and the
Because these look like they're all about 4.
right, right. So I should say, yeah, I should have included this in the graph. In the as I said, the first 2 fillers I gave in the offline survey, one was bad and the other was good, and they were ranging from 2, roughly 2 for the bad ones, and roughly 6 for the really good ones. I mean, it seems like for some reason people hesitate to say a sentence is perfect, even if it's like, my name is David, right?
Right.
But I don't know why that is. I've never figured that out. But
did you
yeah.
try? Oh, sorry. Did you try a yes/no judgment?
Yes, no. I didn't. No.
Just a yes or no. Yeah. Checkmark star.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, and this is another thing that is to me like a philosophical issue. I mean, not with this. With the yes, no, that's something I should have included and would do so in the future. But with all these things, I mean, in both cases, I should say, for both experiments, there was no English at all. Everything is Japanese text. But I often say to psycholinguists, like, oh, this is very difficult to study these kinds of things, these kinds of sentences, right? It's maybe too hard experimentally if there's naive speakers, right, for some of the reasons I mentioned. And then their response is, well, you just have to make a good enough methodology, and that good enough usually means training. And then it's like, but they're not really naive speakers anymore if you train them so much. But something like a yes/no methodology, I think, would be perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
This is a clarification question. So,
Sure.
first of all, I didn't really understand why you use a self-paced reading
Sure.
task, because in this case you don't have a gap, okay?
Yeah, right.
And the related question is why did you expect region 7 and 8 to be the critical regions? So what's the rationale behind this thing?
Right. Okay. Yeah. This is why. I mean, so the self-paced reading I had done because I had seen it work effectively in the Fellows paper, and then and I think I mentioned this in here somewhere, but I didn't in the talk. Right. This is an interesting question. So when we get to Kadoka, there should be an attempt to get the maybe an attempt to get the question word have a matrix association or matrix matrix scope, I should say. But there's also a big question of whether or not you would even get such any kind of effect when the WH word and its theta marking verb are so close together. So that's why I added the untimed task. I thought that when you get to the matrix verb and the question particle, there might be slowdown there. When you see, oh, okay, this is the end of the sentence, I see this question particle here, slow down reading time. But it wasn't clear to me. That's why I did it, yeah. And added the untimed. I think the untimed task is crucial here. So for that reason.
Any other question? Or one?
2 quick clarifications. I think you said on the offline task you had 19 subjects. Was that correct, or did I mishear that? Okay.
That's right.
Okay, I just didn't see that. And then on the pseudo-Latin squaring,
Yeah.
was it the case that people consistently saw like a certain combination of the 2? Like, for example, if I were a subject, did I consistently see examples of 16A and 16C in the same lexicalizations? Or did those pairwise comparisons vary?
If I understand your question correctly, they did not vary.
Okay.
So it'd be like 1A, 1B, 2C, 2D, and so on and so forth, which, yes, could be a definite weakness.
Right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just might be something that you want to look at in the future. And also, with constructing your fillers, it looks like, especially in your self-paced reading results, the thing that they're responding to fastest is actually the weather lexical item.
Yeah.
So since it's in, all 4 of these experimental conditions, they may actually be predicting it at some point.
I see.
So they might have some type of strategy involved. So if you have fillers that, look similar to these sentences, but then don't continue that way. You can
Okay.
dissuade that kind of strategy.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.